Well, good morning. This is November the 8th, 2020, Sunday morning. And I'm in the book of Hebrews, teaching through the book of Hebrews. For those of you who were with me last week, I was in Hebrews chapter 9. I think I mentioned that I was going to go into chapter 10. I might a little bit towards the end, but I decided this morning officially that I really do want to spend a little bit more time talking about something else before I proceed too far into Hebrews chapter 10. So I'm going to do that to talk about some of these things from a little bit of a different point of view. The idea of there being another testament, another will, another covenant, that this is the will of God that has gone into effect as a result of his death. To get into this subject here that I want to approach, let me start out by kind of reminding you a little bit about what the objective of God is with this project, with what he's doing here on this earth. That there is an objective, that there's something, there's purpose that he has in mind. And to me, the evidence is quite overwhelming to show that the objective or the desire, what it is that God is accomplishing, is that in the end, what he does get is he gets individuals. He gets individuals, and he gets to have an individual personal relationship with these individuals. All right, namely his children, the people who decide to surrender to the new covenant, those who are born again. All right, there is an opportunity for him to have a personal, interactive relationship on an individual basis with the people who decide that they want to have a relationship with him. That effectively, that's what all of this produces, what we have in this world and everything that's going on. And I think it'd be helpful for us to remember that regardless of what is going on in the world around us, regardless of what has happened in history, or what we may be concerned about in terms of what may be happening in the future, to try to keep in mind that in the end, the only thing that really will make a difference, the only thing that will matter, the only thing that will survive, all right, is going to be the personal relationship between us and our God. This is something that he desires, that he would like to have. But he has some specifics with regards to the kind of relationship that he is willing to have, or that he will have. He will not have a relationship with someone on an eternal basis that he doesn't want to have. All right? He's not going to have the kind of relationship that everybody else wants him to have. He's going to have something definitive about what within a certain realm of boundaries. What is the kind of relationship he's going to have is going to be the one that he would like to have. Now, to keep this in mind, this also means that for it to be a legitimate relationship, that the other person, you, myself, these other people that he has this opportunity with, we have to want to have a relationship with him also. And of course, this is part of the criteria that he has. He does not want to have a relationship with somebody who does not want to have a relationship with him. And what I mean by this is a personal one. All right, and so those people who would like to have a personal, interactive relationship with him in the way that he would like, the way that he would feel would be a healthy and sound, functional relationship, then those are the people who will have such a relationship with him. Now, it turns out that out of the huge number of people who have been born into this world, in addition to the two that were created, Adam and Eve, but everyone who's been born into this world, out of the billions, of people who have been born into this world and who have had this opportunity, very few, from what we can tell, are going to have an eternal, personal, interactive relationship with their God. That's just how it goes, right? There are going to be very few. We don't know what that number is. We can just tell that it's definitely small relative to the majority of the people. And to God, this is acceptable. Even though the majority of the people will not be in the kingdom of heaven, they will not be in his eternal presence, to him this is acceptable. And you need to understand this, that he is not going to have, some emotional challenge over the issue that most people will go to hell. That's just not something that is going to be a topic for him. He will forget them. They will be forgotten. We have a God who understands that there will be very few people, and this is acceptable. All right? And one of the ways to think about this, the way that I would prefer to think about this most often, is to say that it is better for there to be some people who will have something real with their God in terms of a personal relationship. It is better for some than for there to be none. And so the fact that he gets some, and the ones that he will get, this is good. All right? And God will say that this is good. So I want you to consider what it is that his objective really is, and to view some things from that point of view. I think you'll find it much easier. Right now, for those who do not really want to have too much of a relationship with him at all, or none at all, I'm going to divide these people up into two categories, even though I'm not going to be talking about the first category too much. The first category are those people who just outright want to reject God. They just want him out of their life and to leave them alone, and that's what they get. All right, God will leave them alone. They're born in this world. They live their lives. They die, and then they are forgotten. Of course, they will live eternally because they were created to be an eternal being, and they will be very uncomfortable. But that's their business, that's their decision, and that's what they get, and that's the consequences of their own interests and their own actions. And if they choose to be so self-destructive, then by all means, God has made a provision to make that work out for them, just not in the way that they would necessarily like, but that's how it goes. And so the first group are those who just outright just reject him entirely. Those are easy people to deal with, no problem with them whatsoever. Just leave them alone, let them go to hell. That's just how it goes. Now then there's the second group that I'd like to refer to. And this morning, those are the ones who I'm going to be speaking about for the most part, the second group, and that's what I'm going to call the religious. All right, and the religious would like to have a relationship with God, but the kind of relationship that they want to have is not consistent with the kind of relationship that he wants to have. So there are going to be some issues with regards to that, but primarily the religious people are not really interested in a genuine personal relationship. Most of the folks who I would consider to be religious are those people who want an impersonal relationship. They don't want a personal one, they want an impersonal one. And one of the ways to understand the differences between the two groups of people and how they may relate to God is the first one would say, just leave me alone, and maybe one day life will get so bad that I will consider turning to you and consider that maybe there needs to be something between them and their God. That's usually how that goes. You have to wait until there's a great life change, some kind of dramatic catastrophe of some kind, where they reach a point where they're going to redefine what their life is. And when they redefine, because the previous one just completely falls apart. And so as they redefine what their life may be, they may consider, let's consider that maybe there's a God and maybe it would be good to have him in my life. For the first group of people who just reject God entirely, often that's how that unfolds. All right, I'm just speaking in generalities. Everybody's got their own story and their own path per se. But I can't talk about everyone. I'm just speaking about this from a general perspective from what I've seen. All right. But for those who are religious, what they're thinking of more than anything is that they don't really want something personal. What they want is something that is impersonal, something that is not so personal. And for those people, what they're thinking for the most part is they want someone who's going to be useful. They want God to be useful. All right. For the first group, God, just leave me alone. For the second group, okay, we'll allow you to have a place in our lives, but only insofar as you are useful. What is your utility? That's how the religious will often consider God. Now, this can work. This can work eventually because at least it's a start. It's better than no start at all. It's better than just God waiting until a person changes their mind because they realize life is really hard. It can work, and he'll use it. But for the religious, it's a good start in the sense that at least they have a little bit more access, a little bit more involvement, a little bit more activity. At least they are going to give a little bit more thought to God, who he is, probably study their Bible. Things like that will often take place with the religious, and so there are more opportunities for a personal relationship to take place later, more opportunities than there would be otherwise. All right, so I'm going to speak a little bit about the religious folks for now, and to try to give you a little bit of a better perspective for the end of Hebrews chapter 9 and the other relevant passages that are parallel to that. To give you a little bit of a better understanding of how the people at the time that this letter was written, how they would have read it, and what may have been on their mind as a result of this. And these are things that are these are things that I'm going to speak of, are things that are on the minds of a lot of people today. Because just as there were a lot of religious people back then, there's a lot of religious people today, and the same religious struggles exist. They may use a different vocabulary, they may use different sacramental practices, whatever it may be, but the real core issues are still present. All right? When God established the nation of Israel, he did it on the basis of his usefulness, on the basis of his utility. He did bait the people in. He invited the people in to have an opportunity to have an experience with him on the basis of how useful he would be to them. First and foremost, he would set them free from slavery. That's pretty useful. Can you imagine, perhaps, what it would be like to be a slave in Egypt and to think, I really think that it would be better if I wasn't a slave. Clearly the only way I'm going to be free is if some God sets me free. And I did hear about this God through our forefathers, who mentioned that he would be setting us free and provide us with our own land to dwell in. This sounds pretty good. Sure, I'll take that. And so in that sense, God was able to start with them because he offered usefulness. He offered his utility. He says, look, I'll tell you what, I'll set you free. I'll give you a place to stay. I'll set you free from your current life circumstances that you clearly don't like. I will give you a place to stay. I'll give you everything you need, and then you can have a new life. And of course, maybe you'll like me, right? Maybe you'll like me because I do that, or maybe not. Maybe you'll just feel like I just owe you that, or who knows what. There's a lot of different attitudes that people can have in response to that. You can keep reading and see how they felt about what he did for them. But this was a way of establishing a relationship, and it was an impersonal one. It was an impersonal one. It was not a personal one. It was something that he established with the group, with the collective. Right? He established and defined a relationship with the collective. And it was primarily based on what he would do for them. All right? Now, sure, they did some things for him in a sense. They did what? They offered sacrifices. He really didn't have much of an interest in sacrifices. Personally, that was not a way to have a personal engagement. The sacrificial system was established by God to be able to do other things at a future date, which this is an example of how he used the sacrificial system in order to describe and in order to accomplish salvation through the sacrifice of the Messiah, things like that. All right, so the people could say, oh, God is just feeling lonely, and he just wants to have some friends, some family. He wants people who will like him, and this is what he wants. He wants us to perform sacrifices and offerings at this temple or this tabernacle that he has set up, and that way he'll feel like he's important. All right, that's not what he's thinking. But from the religious point of view, this is acceptable because it's very impersonal. All right, it's just fine. What else did he want them to do? He wanted them to not sin. Okay, but was this really for him? Not really. I mean, certainly he can obtain benefit, but it wasn't so much for him. Primarily, it was about, look, folks, you guys are very self-destructive. Very self-destructive. I would like you to stop being so self-destructive, right? And live a life in peace and joy, happis, growth, increased change, in a good way to live, to be alive. And this is what he would like to see. All right, but for the most part, people are thinking we have this God who's just so disturbed by our sin that he is going to establish a relationship such that we will stop it. And as long as we have enough incentive, such as enough blessings, and also the concern about being cursed and getting the beatings, then maybe we'll make these changes, and then God can live in peace, right? Then maybe he can live in peace. That's not what he's doing. But this is what the religious often assume, either openly, directly, or indirectly. This is something that is in general assumed that God is dealing with and what he wants. All right, so I wanted to review that a little bit and hopefully remind you of what it is that God is actually working on and what he's accomplishing. All right, he really is after the personal relationship, but for the most part, when it comes to the religious issues, that relationship tends to be impersonal. And I'll explain in just a little bit that for a lot of people, right, for most people, they want the impersonal one. Either they don't want anything to do with God at all. They don't even want to acknowledge that he is real and that he exists. Or those who are willing to do so, they still just want an impersonal one based on his utility and his usefulness. Okay, now when it came to the setting up of the nation of Israel and the giving of the Old Covenant, I want you to consider and to understand that this covenant was not intended by God to be a permanent covenant. That was not what he established it for. That may seem a little troubling because it's referred to as an everlasting covenant, as an eternal covenant. And in that sense, in a certain way, it can be understood that way. That's fine. However, please keep in mind that for it to really be in effect and for it to be functional, there has to be an earth. There has to be people, and we have to be living here, right? And this earth is not going to spin forever, and people are not going to be here forever. So from that perspective, from an eternal perspective, it is not as everlasting as you might think. All right, an everlasting one in the sense of as long as it can go on. But once the flesh is gone, virtually everything about the Old Covenant immediately becomes obsolete. Everything. All right, what are we worried? Let's just pick on the first 10 commandments, such as the Sabbath day. The Sabbath day, that may not be so functional anymore. With regards to buying and selling and whether you're working or not. When you go into the kingdom of heaven, life is probably going to be a little bit different. We may not be operating on a 7-day week cycle anymore. We may not be. So that that's a possibility. It's not so obvious. What would be a little bit more obvious would be something like murder. How about that one? Don't murder anybody. Well, if there's eternal life and everyone's alive and nobody can die, well, life is going to look a little different then, isn't it? All right. So this is a way of understanding that the old covenant, while it was set up as an eternal and an everlasting covenant from generation to generation, it really only lasts as long as we have an earth and we have the people on the earth, etc. And there will come a point where that's going to end. Okay? So that's one way to understand this. Another way to understand this as a temporary covenant is to realize that he invoked a new one. Right? And that's what I would prefer to focus on right now, is the issue that the old covenant was established to be a temporary covenant because he was going to invoke a new one, another one. And on that basis, I'm going to refer to it as a temporary one. Now, in the Living God Ministries archive, I did some programs that are good for this. I have Everlasting Covenant, Everlasting Passover in the radio archive there. Those are great programs. Listen to those if you're not familiar with them. Very useful. I talk about a number of important issues there in those programs, but this is different, all right? In this case, I'm going to refer to the Old Covenant more as a temporary covenant, and the New Covenant as the one that really turns out to be eternal, even though we go through changes, because it's something that we surrender to while we are physically alive, but it's something that we experience in continuation after we physically die. All right, and so I want you to think about it from a temporary point of view this morning, please, that the Old Covenant was established not to be permanent, but it was established for a certain period of time, and then it was not going to be the way that God would relate to people. All right, now with regards to the Old Covenant, it was a covenant towards the collective, towards a group of people, not really so much on an individual basis. It was not a covenant that would work or be established on an individual level. It was a collective covenant, and God established it to be temporary until an appointed time. Now, when he engaged and invoked the first covenant, the old one, when it got started, it was something that he entered into with the nation of Israel. And when this relationship got started, just like any relationship, it began, and it wasn't very long before there was conflict. All right? There wasn't very long, and there was conflict, and there was power struggle. All right? And this is mainly because the two parties, God and the people, they had different interests. They just did. They had different interests. God wanted the people to have a certain degree of happiness and joy, and he wanted them to live their lives without engaging in self-destructive behavior. But they, on the other hand, they wanted to live their lives with self-destructive behavior. All right, so that just in and of itself, that results in conflict. It just does, and it results in a power struggle. All right, now the power struggle and the conflict is much bigger than just the desire for self-destructive behavior or the desire for sin. It's much bigger than that, and it shows itself in many different ways. All right, now one of the ways that I introduced this before, or that that you could probably relate to, is that the law stirs up sin. All right, and the law stirs up sin in four fundamental ways. Just to give you a little bit of a review and to get a feel for what I'm going to describe. It stirs up sin because it stirs up the natural rebellion of humanity. When God said, "Now this is what I want you to do, and this is what I don't want you to do, and I want you to not do this," then the natural rebellion of many people will respond by saying, don't be telling me what I can do and what I can't do. I'm going to just engage in this sin, even though it may be quite self-destructive. I'm going to do it anyway, just because I want the power. Just because I want to be in charge. I really want to be my own God. God, you're useful if you're going to give me plenty of flour in my kneading bowl, if you're going to make sure that I lend and not borrow, if you're going to help me in war, if stuff like that is good. But everything else, hey, if this is something I want to do, I'm going to do it. And even if I didn't even want to do it before, just because you told me not to do it, I'm going to do it anyway. That is something that exists in a lot of people. And of course, there is a scale where there's just a little bit of that in some people and a lot of that in other people. But it is an issue. And when God defined the relationship through the Old Covenant, he increased this kind of rebellion because of the relationship, because of the power struggle and the conflict that would take place. This is just the response that people have. And, people who live this way, they genuinely, they really do get a good feeling. For those of you who accomplish things, all right? For those of you who actually do things, solve problems, create things, make things, build things, fix things, for those of you who do good things, you probably feel pretty good after you have accomplished something, right? You get that feeling of accomplishment, of purpose, of meaning. You did something great, something really good, and you feel good about it. And you should feel good about it. You should not feel guilty about that at all. Well, these other people, they get the same feeling, maybe even more so, when they succeed at not doing what they ought to do. All right? I know it might sound a little bizarre, but to them, that is an accomplishment. All right? When God says, don't do this, they do it, they feel like, hey, I have accomplished. I am good. I am awesome. I am great. And I feel it, especially because it was God himself who told me not to do that. All right? You got to understand that there really are people who are like this, and they're probably not going to admit it, all right, or tell you, but this is what they're really about. And they genuinely like that. And so when God set up this temporary relationship, he gave opportunity. He increased the opportunity for people to be like this more. All right? He really did. So you've got the natural rebellion of humanity, and then you've got the people who just, they never would have even thought about doing these things until he mentioned it. And now that he mentioned it, then there's now an increase in temptation. And so God has, in effect, through the giving of law, through the giving of the law, he increased the temptations that people would now struggle with, and many would fall to. And this is a choice of the people, and people will just simply decide, well, hey, that does seem kind of nice. I'm just going to do it. And through doing that, they increase their sense of power. They increase their sense of control. They increase their sense of independence, right? And in this way, they are further disconnected from God. But remember, these are the kinds of people who don't want a personal relationship with him. They genuinely want an impersonal relationship with God. And so the natural rebellion of humanity, the people who will have an increase in temptations, these are folks that will think that this is good, right? That this is a good thing. And that, give them some more religion, give them some more rules, give them some more laws, give them some more commandments, because that will increase their rebellion and their sin, and they will feel better and better and better and more and more and more of their own selves, of their own independence, of their own lack of relationship with God, because they don't really want to have one with him anyway. Not a personal one. They're okay with the collective one. They're okay with the God who will give them everything they need, who will protect them, who will provide for them, who will give them all the safety and security that they desire. They're good with that. But when it comes to how they're going to live their lives and engage in self-destructive behavior, No, they don't want him to invade on that. They want to be able to do that, and they want God to support it. All right? They want God to have this impersonal relationship that he defined through the law such that he would support it and he would make it possible for them to do this. Otherwise they end up being slaves to somebody else, right? And who wants to be in slavery? And then, of course, they're not going to be able to indulge their flesh at all. But that's how it goes, all right? So God set up the law so that there's a natural rebellion. There's an increase in sin through the increase in temptations. Sin gets increased in other ways as well through religion. When a person fails and they know that God rejects them, then they will often go and pursue sin in order to get a break from all the religious pressure. If we have a desire to be accepted, we want people to like us, and God doesn't, and he makes it clear that he doesn't, well then all we've got as an alternative is to go out in the world and, for the most part, engage in sin. There are ways to do so, to do this without sin constructively, but to engage in sin, most things are engaging in sin so that maybe people will like us. All right, and there's a whole lot to say about that. I won't do it right now. But there's an increase in sin. So through this relationship, this temporary relationship that God established through the giving of the old covenant with the nation of Israel, in this way he causes only because he gives the circumstances and he gives the provision. But it's the people themselves who make the decision on their own and they respond. But because of what he did, people have new opportunities to increase their dysfunction, increase their sinfulness, right? Then you have religious pride. And that happens when a person believes they have succeeded. All right? So when a person recognizes that they have not succeeded, you get an increase in sin. When they think that they have succeeded, now there's another opportunity for an increase in sin, just different kinds of sins. Now we can get the sins of religious pride. All right? And I'll just summarize this so I can proceed. I'll just summarize this and remind you that a religious person can often be one of the meanest people that you ever run across in your life. All right? And I'm sure you'll find lots of ways that you could accuse them of engaging in sinful attitudes, sinful expressions out of their religious pride. So through the giving of the old covenant, through the giving of a religious system, in effect, God has contributed. God has enabled. He has made it possible for people to become evil in more ways than one. All right? In more ways. So God entered into this relationship. He would like to have a personal relationship, but the people wanted an impersonal one. As a result, there would be conflict. Now, as part of the personal relationship, he is the one who holds all power and authority. People were not willing to give that up, and so not only do we have a general conflict, but we also have the power struggle. All right, the power struggle between people and God. Now, where we are at here in Hebrews, in chapter 9 and the surrounding areas, where we are at here is we have the description where God has invoked a new covenant. The writer is speaking to the people about the new covenant and how God has used the old in order to establish definitions and terms and understandings that he can use so that he can define the true things and the real things. I've spent a lot of time talking about that. This morning I want to approach this from the point of view of him establishing a temporary relationship, and then there is the establishment of a new relationship. All right, now with the people, especially the believers in Jesus in Jerusalem during this time, all right, they did not want the old relationship to end. Okay, so that was a struggle, and we can read about that in the book of Acts and also in the book of Galatians. There's a lot to show that the people in Israel, especially around Jerusalem, the church in Jerusalem, they did not really want the old relationship to end. They really did want the old relationship, the old covenant, to stay alive. They were very much participating in the things of the temple, as an example, because they wanted those things to continue. They wanted continuance of this old relationship. They wanted the law. They wanted to be zealous for the law. And like I said, for those who are really more interested in an impersonal relationship, it's going to be more appealing. All right? It just is. As opposed to those who would be willing to have the old relationship. So this was the topic. And the writer is speaking to the people, inviting them to exit from the old relationship, to exit from the old covenant, to exit from the temple. This is what's inherent with the things that the writer is proclaiming, is that he's trying to encourage the people to let the old covenant go, to enter into the new. That the old covenant has nothing but self-destruction, and the new covenant is where life is, and where joy is, and where eternity really is. All right, but these are people who are not really ready or willing or wanting to let the old covenant go, to let this relationship die. Now, God ended the relationship when he sent the people into slavery. You know, when he sent the people into slavery, the first group went, the Israelite tribes, or the Israelites that were in the northern part after the kingdom was divided in half when Solomon died, the kingdom was divided. And the northern part, they were sent into slavery. And then a while later, then the southern part, they were sent into slavery. And so they were all evicted. The relationship ended. God effectively ended the covenant, ended the relationship with the collective, with the nation, with the people. It was over. However, he did promise that if certain conditions were met, that they would repent, that he would allow them to return to the land, and then the relationship could perhaps be renewed to an extent. And that did happen in fulfillment of the promises. All right. And then they were there for a period of time until the Messiah came. He invoked the new covenant, which really was why he had them come back. It was so that the new covenant could be invoked and the new relationship could be defined. And then it wasn't very long before everyone, for the most part, was removed from the land as well after that. And that went on for a long time. And now the people have been returned. The people have come back. And I do believe that God was definitely a participant in the people returning to the nation of Israel today. And I don't think that they're ever going to leave. But I don't think that this has anything to do with restoring the old covenant, the old relationship, and making a new one. I don't think it has anything to do with that at all. I personally think it has nothing to do with that. It only has to do with him fulfilling the promises that he made. But it's not about now he's going to invoke the relationship with them that was defined in the Mosaic law. They, not all of them, but a lot of them, those are those who are religious, all right, in Israel, which for the most part is a secular society right now. But for those few, who want to have that, they are going to do their best to try and reestablish the old covenant again, and they're going to build their temple again, and they're going to want God to be there and be subject to that relationship again, which will cause the same effect that I described before about the power of the law stirring up sin. They want that. They want that collective. They want that impersonal relationship. Few, enough of them want that. They will try to get it. But God is not going to be a participant this time. He's not going to be a participant of those things in the temple. He's not going to be a part of that relationship. They may want him to. They may try to get him to. There's even a lot of Christians who want God to have that kind of relationship with them, which to me is absurd, but there are. I have met them, I've talked with them, and in effect, they want God to be bound in that kind of a relationship with the nation of Israel. You know, he set it up, he defined it, we've got it here in the Mosaic Law, and yeah, he exited, but we want him to go back into it. We do. We want him to be bound, and he has to go there, and he has to do this because, you know, we just want that, and we want him to give the people an opportunity to try it again, maybe with the help of the Christians. They'll do it right this time. There are a lot. I'm hesitating because I've talked with so many people about this, and so many have got their own different variations of how they would really like things to be. But the summary is that they want God to be bound to the old covenant again with those people over there, you know, with the help of us Christians, kind of thing. That tends to be the attitude that a lot of people will have. All right, but he exited that relationship, and he offered a new kind of relationship through the Lord Jesus. Okay, so that's I'm giving you all that background in order to tell you a little bit more about Hebrews chapter 9. So with Hebrews chapter 9, as I mentioned before, last week I think it was, I mentioned last week that Jesus did not go to the temple in Jerusalem when he rose from the dead. He didn't go there and go into the most holy place there looking for the Ark of the Covenant to sprinkle his blood. That wasn't what he was going to do. That wasn't what he was doing. That was not what he was about. All right? He did not participate in the temple in Jerusalem and all of the sacraments and the ceremonies and the sacrifices, all those things that define the relationship that the people wanted to have with God, that he just simply was not going to have a part of anymore. He didn't go there. He went to the real sanctuary. He went to his sanctuary. All right? So even though the people had spent over 40 years building this sanctuary, building their temple, building the house of God, he didn't go there in order to engage in a relationship with them as they wanted. He did not respect or honor their sanctuary. He didn't do that. He's got his own sanctuary. So he went there. So when he ended the old covenant through his death and resurrection, and he invoked the new covenant through forgiveness of sins and the restoration of life, when he did that, he didn't go to our sanctuary. He went to his own sanctuary. That's where he went. He went to his sanctuary. And so the relationship that we are going to have with him, if it's going to be one at all, the relationship that we will have with him will be one that is on the basis of his sanctuary and on his terms. And with his terms, this is an important issue. For him, the subject of sin, the issue of sin, is over. For him, it's over. He has closure when it comes to the topic of sin. For the religious, they do not want closure. Let me say that again, all right? Because I know that might sound a little bizarre. For the religious, they do not want closure when it comes to the subject of sin. Now, I could say, haven't you noticed? Isn't it obvious? Right? They keep talking about it. They want it to stay alive. The priesthood loves it because they make a living off of it, right? Keep sin alive. Keep it alive. Make sure everybody's told that they're a sinner, because then they need a sacrificial system. They need their pastor. They need the altar. They need the sanctuary. They need all that religious stuff so that they can obtain forgiveness. And so for the priesthood, whatever it is, they need sin to be alive. They need lots of it. They make a living off of an increase in sin. The more the better. All right? Even though they keep telling you and pounding you with the Bible on the pulpit in a sense, or they keep pounding the pulpit with their fists. Stop sinning, you people. Stop it. Quit it. Get it out of your lives. They may be quite sincere about it, but then you have an increase, right? You have an increase because now you have an increase in the law, and now you get the natural rebellion of humanity. You get more things for people to be tempted with. You get the people who are rejected by God, and they need some relief from the pressure, so they need some sin in their life. And then you got the religious pride. I mean, it just explodes. It just gets bigger and bigger. All right? For God, he ended sin. As far as he's concerned, it's over. It's dead. But, for the religious, they really want to keep it alive. Okay? They really want to keep it alive. From the priesthood point of view, that's one. From the people point of view, I'm going to remind you of what I mentioned before. It's just as what I mentioned before about the power struggle. A tremendous power struggle, and how people love the power struggle. They love to be empowered, and if God keeps telling them, stop it, stop it, stop it, and they keep doing it, then to them, this is good, all right? This is great. They feel accomplished. They feel empowered. They feel important. They feel greater than God. God keeps telling them to stop sinning, and they just keep doing it anyway. All right? Yes, there are people like this. And so for them, yes, we want to keep this relationship going. We want to keep sin alive. We want God to be worried about sin. We want that because through our rebellion, we get to experience power, control, accomplishment, everything that he's promising us if we were to stop being so self-destructive. But hey, do it get these feelings while being self-destructive. Might as well. What's the difference? There are people who think this way. There really are. So they don't want God to be allowed to exit from this relationship. They don't want God to have closure when it comes to the subject of sin. They want him to be concerned about it. They want him to be occupied with it. They know full well that they are not going to stop their self-destruction. They know full well that they will never obey, and they love the fact that God is wasting his time on them. They love it. They love how God wastes his time, wastes his life being concerned with them, trying to help them, trying to do good things for them, trying to get them to be right with him. All that stuff. They love it. They want it. They want the conflict to continue. They do not want closure. But God takes closure anyway. He seizes closure. He says, you know what? I'm going to die for the sin. And he just does it. Doesn't ask anybody's permission. He doesn't really even let anybody know that's what he's doing. He just gets his closure. He gets it ended and says, this is done. It is finished. It is finished, people. And, and then we're out here trying to beg people to be reconciled to God when God has said effectively he is done with it. And he didn't even go to their sanctuary. He didn't go to their sanctuary to sprinkle the blood of his his own blood, blood of the covenant. He didn't go to theirs. He's not going to go into their space, into their lives, into their sanctuary, as if he's obtaining their permission, or he's obtaining their acknowledgement, or their acceptance. Forget it. He just goes right to his sanctuary in his kingdom, and he puts the blood down and says, this issue is over. This is done. It is finished. And now he has officially, completely, totally exited that relationship that he previously established on a temporary basis to accomplish many other things. Those things have all been done. And now we got a new one. So for those who want to have a personal relationship with him, not an impersonal one, but a personal one, the kind that he wants to have, with a person who sure would be interested in experiencing growth and change, and who would be interested in being alive, self-productive as opposed to self-destructive, all right? A person who would like to grow and become someone greater tomorrow and the next day, and to become a participant in the things of God now and here today, and to be a participant in other things later in the future. That's the relationship that he wants. That's the only one that people are going to get if they want to have anything to do with him at all. He's not going to be a part of anything else. He just isn't. All right, so he has closure to the old one, even though you're going to discover in many different creative ways, people want him to be bound to the old kind of relationship, and they want that to be alive, and they don't want him to be able to exit that. He did, and now there is a new one, and that's the one that he is actively involved in, where he does not hold our sins against us anymore. Okay, so from all of that, from that kind of an understanding, that kind of a perspective, let me read Hebrews chapter 9, starting from verse 23. Therefore, it was necessary that the copies of the things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. All right? So he says it was necessary because he was establishing the temporary relationship to accomplish a set of purposes. But just as that was accomplished in that way, so he also established that it would be important, necessary, and purposeful to purify the heavenly things, the real tabernacle in heaven, the real sanctuary, in a similar way. Verse 24, for Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands. All right? Now, he has not entered, let me read this again. For Christ has not entered the holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true, but into heaven itself. Let me pause there and say that he did not enter into the holy places made with hands. It's a way of saying he exited the holy places made with hands, and he's not going back. He's gone. He left. He ended that relationship. And he went and did another one. He's got another one going. Now to appear in the presence of God for us. Not that he should offer himself often, as the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood of another. Oh, they love that. Yeah, every year. Keep sin alive. Keep sin going. Why? Because I can just commit all the sin I want knowing that there is a sacrificial system. There is a sacrificial system. I can go apologize. I can confess. I can ask for forgiveness. They want that kind of a system because it gives them a way to continue the sin, to continue the self-destruction. But when God says, nope, there's no more sacrifices, no more of that at all, no more forgiveness, it's just over, you take away the power of the self-destructive. When God resolved the sin issue and got closure, he took away the power of the self-destructive. Now, of course, they're still self-destructive, but he takes away the power in the sense of the power struggle between him and the people. He took away the power that they had to engage in the power struggle. Now, he is free. God is free. While everybody else destroys themselves, he is free. He then, verse 26, he then would have had to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the end of the ages, he has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. And as it is appointed for men to die once, but after this the judgment, so Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. to those who eagerly wait for him. He will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. So with this new relationship and the sin issue being over, he's going to appear again apart from sin. Do you see that? The end of chapter 9, verse 28. Verse 28, he will appear a second time apart from sin. So while everybody is still all concerned about sin for various reasons, and while people want to keep sin alive, they want to keep the law alive, they want to keep the covenant alive for many different reasons, all right? And I spent extra time today talking about those who are highly dysfunctional. There are the sincere too. I just didn't mention them today. But the results are still the same, okay? The results are still the same. They're thinking that even right now, God is really worried about sin. He's just consumed with it. And he's not. Right? That is not his concern. That is not his issue. There are people who are terrified that God is going to show up today. And they're not right with God. They're not ready. There's some things that I do that are just downright evil. I don't want him to show up right now. Especially because I'm doing those things right now. If people think that way, not realizing that when he returns, he's going to return apart from sin. He's just coming for salvation. That's what he's going to do. Now, of course, there are some people who will use that as an excuse to go out and indulge their flesh, but not all. And those who don't are the ones who have an honest and true and real relationship with their God. All right? And so there's few. Well, you know what? It's better to have few and some than to have none. As I mentioned before, with regards to salvation as a whole. All right? So he will get some. And they may be few. But remember, he is no longer having anything to do with a relationship with a collective. His covenant and his relationship with us is about the personal relationship, the individual relationship, not the collective. And that's why he's free to just come for salvation and not have to come for judgment or anything like that. All that stuff will take care of itself. He will come for salvation apart from sin. The sin issue for him is over. He has exited it. Don't try to drag him back into it. He's not going to come. People are thinking, maybe I can get God involved and he'll bring judgment. You know what? Well, okay, maybe he will. And I don't want to take that away from him. But I'm speaking on behalf in terms of the new relationship and the new covenant in this context. You're not going to drag him into it. All right? You're not going to do it. If he decides, by all means, it's his choice, and he can do that, he's free. But overall, we keep thinking, how can I get God involved so that we can get some judgment of God here going on, And that's just not what he's doing. All right? He is about resurrection. He's about creating life. He's about an increase in joy and in peace and in happiness in the core of our being, in our spirits, in our souls for eternity with salvation. That's what we're doing. That's what he's preoccupied with, and that's what he's going to continue to do. All right. This is going to go on, and it's going to go on as long as he can get new children. As long as he can get more kids, let's just keep it going. Keep it going as long as, another generation after that, there will be a few. There will be a few that will be for him. So let's, from his perspective, let it proceed. Let it go on. Because the longer it goes on, the more that he gets for himself, and he gets to experience a personal, interactive relationship with a person who wants to have the kind of relationship with him that he is willing to have. And this is one that is full of life and full of eternity. Okay? So, with all of that, let's pray. And then I got a question for you, okay? Dear God, thank you so much for this time that we could spend to be reminded of the big picture, be reminded of all that you are doing and all that you are accomplishing, and to remind us that you exited the old relationship and you entered a new one, that you did not return to the sanctuary made with hands, but you went back to your own, and that you have invited us to come to be in your sanctuary, not within ours, but to be within yours. And I thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen. So for those of you who are in some small groups, I got a question. How does religion encourage self-destructive behavior for most people? Right? And that seems a little strange, right? Because you think that religion is all about putting people into a form of bondage so that they are not self-destructive. However, it ends up creating more self-destruction. I spoke a lot about a lot of these things. Please speak about these things among yourselves, especially those that you can relate to the best. Come up with some examples if you can, to talk about how it encourages self-destructive behavior, even though it advertises that it's trying not to do that. And I'm asking you to talk about this a little bit in order to enforce these ideas and to have a greater appreciation for the fact that God exited that kind of relationship with people and that he has provided another one for us to enter into. All right? Thank you.